Your connection to God is temporarily limited when the body and mind cannot yet carry what your deepest awareness already touches. You pray, yet the chest stays tight. You enter silence, yet an old reaction keeps speaking. The current has stayed present. Your usable capacity has narrowed. We will trace that narrowing through noise, constriction, and contradiction, then show how contact becomes embodied again. The first answer is simple. Divine distance and human capacity are two different questions. The sky can fill the whole world while a shutter leaves one room dim. In the same way, God can remain fully present while your nervous habits, attention, emotional residue, and repeated choices reduce how much of that presence you can recognize and carry. Lot reads the restriction through three layers: noise in the mind, constriction in the body, and contradiction in the life. When those three layers reinforce one another, connection becomes an occasional state. When they begin moving into order, connection becomes a living relationship. That distinction protects the title from turning into fear. A temporary limit carries movement inside it. It says the opening can widen. It says the present condition is real without becoming your permanent identity. It also places responsibility in the correct place. Waiting for God to come closer keeps the old arrangement alive. The deeper work concerns the instrument through which closeness becomes felt, known, and expressed. Look at noise first. A thought appears, then another one argues with it. A memory pulls attention backward. An imagined conversation drags it forward. The mouth may still be praying, but attention has already scattered into 10 different rooms. In yogic language, attention and prana move together. Prana is a traditional word for life force, the subtle vitality associated with breath, sensation, attention, and action. When attention becomes fragmented, the felt current of life also appears fragmented. The person experiences this as fog, restlessness, shallow devotion, or the strange feeling that spiritual words have lost their charge. Noise can be loud, and it can also look respectable. Endless spiritual research can keep the mind moving while direct contact stays thin. One teaching leads to another teacher, then another terminology, then another promised activation. The collection grows. The capacity to remain present with one truth stays weak. Knowledge fills the shelves, while attention loses its spine. A person can explain 7 chakras and still become fully possessed by one insulting message. That moment gives us better evidence than the vocabulary. The second restriction is constriction. The body reports it before the personality creates a philosophy. The chest hardens around grief. The throat tightens around speech. The stomach contracts around uncertainty. The jaw holds an argument long after the room became quiet. These responses have physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions. LONT treats the body as the laboratory where repeated reactions become visible. The body carries memory through posture, timing, sensation, appetite, and impulse. Direct God contact has to pass through this living history if it is going to become embodied. The third restriction is contradiction. A person asks for peace, then repeatedly feeds the habits that keep agitation alive. He asks for truth, then protects the lie that secures his image. She asks for love, then withdraws presence each time love becomes inconvenient. The prayer moves in one direction. The daily agreement moves in another. That split consumes force. It teaches the body that God belongs to sacred moments, while fear, pride, appetite, and resentment govern the remaining hours. So, the first real payoff is already here. Your connection becomes temporarily limited when noise scatters recognition, constriction narrows conduction, and contradiction blocks embodiment. Recognition means you can perceive the presence. Conduction means the body can carry the force without immediately collapsing into an old reaction. Embodiment means your choices begin expressing what you claim to know. These three belong together. The first can happen in a second. A line of scripture, a death in the family, a night of stillness, a dream, a sudden opening in the heart, or a quiet moment in nature can pull the veil aside. Recognition flashes. The second takes training. The body has to learn how to remain available when the feeling becomes intense, when memory rises, and when the familiar identity begins losing its control. The third takes a life. Embodiment enters speech, money, sex, work, relationships, discipline, and the way power is handled. This explains why a beautiful experience can be genuine while its effects fade. The opening may have been real. The vessel could carry it for 10 minutes and then returned to its familiar organization. The mind calls that failure. The deeper reading calls it information. You saw the width of the sky and the present size of the aperture at the same time. If this distinction gives language to something you have experienced, like the video. A temporary opening is valuable because it shows capacity can change. The work begins when the person stops worshipping the memory of the opening and starts reading what closed afterward. What closed? Sometimes fear returned. Sometimes the phone filled every quiet space. Sometimes a conversation triggered the old defense. Sometimes sexual compulsion scattered a gathered force. Sometimes praise created spiritual pride. Sometimes exhaustion made the body seek the oldest comfort available. Each event reveals a different piece of the inner structure. God remained present between the sacred moment and the ordinary one. Attention changed its allegiance. That line deserves precision. Attention is the practical edge of worship. Whatever repeatedly receives your awareness, emotion, imagination, and action begins shaping the inner room. A person can say God with the mouth while worshipping threat with the eyes. He can speak surrender while rehearsing control in the mind. She can speak abundance while training the stomach to tighten around every uncertain number. Worship is larger than declared belief. It is the pattern of force and obedience moving through the day. This is why the limit feels personal. The limitation has been practiced. Each repeated reaction builds familiarity. Familiarity becomes expectation. Expectation begins organizing perception. Perception then selects the evidence that keeps the pattern convincing. A body trained around rejection detects rejection quickly. A body trained around danger gives danger priority. A mind trained around external approval converts silence into a verdict. The divine current reaches the same being, yet the learned filter decides what becomes conscious. The filter also changes what God means. Under fear, God becomes a judge. Under helplessness, God becomes a rescuer who keeps arriving late. Under pride, God becomes an invisible sponsor of the ego. Under grief, God can feel like the one who took something away. Under direct recognition, those images begin loosening. God becomes the living field within which judge, fear, prayer, grief, body, and world are appearing. The relationship stops being a negotiation across distance and starts becoming recognition within experience. That shift asks more from you. A distant God can be blamed, flattered, bargained with, and visited at convenient times. An indwelling reality removes some hiding places. Anger still appears, yet it appears inside the same awareness you call divine. Desire still moves, yet it moves as force inside the same field. The stranger, partner, rival, and animal also appear within that field. Nonduality raises the standard of conduct because separation loses some of its excuses. The temporary limit, therefore, protects an identity as much as it restricts an experience. A wider contact would rearrange priorities. Certain resentments would become too expensive to carry. Certain pleasures would expose their actual cost. Certain relationships would require cleaner speech. Certain ambitions would have to answer a harder question: what kind of being is this success creating? A part of the personality may prefer spiritual longing because longing allows the old structure to survive. Arrival would demand change. The Pratyabhijna tradition of non-dual Shaivism gives this condition a precise language. Consciousness can contract without ceasing to be consciousness. In the Pratyabhijna tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, liberation centers on recognition. The limited individual recognizes the deeper identity as consciousness, the living divine reality. Kesa Maharaj's Heart of Recognition describes universal consciousness appearing in contracted form through the individual. Contraction means vast capacity taking on a narrow viewpoint, limited agency, and limited knowledge. It helps explain the temporary limit without turning God into an absent object. Picture consciousness, looking through one set of eyes, carrying one biography, speaking one language, and responding through one conditioned body. The viewpoint is useful. It allows a distinct life to unfold. The trouble begins when the viewpoint declares itself to be the whole of reality. A temporary instrument becomes a total identity. A local contraction forgets the field from which it arises. The word recognition is important because it carries a different pressure from acquisition. Acquisition says you lack the sacred and must obtain it. Recognition says the sacred ground is already present, while your current organization hides its own source. Acquisition can turn spirituality into accumulation. Recognition turns attention toward the one who is collecting. Who wants the next teaching? Who feels incomplete without the next experience? Who wants to be seen as awakened? Who becomes afraid when the meditation feels empty? These questions expose contraction at the level of identity. The contracted self wants an infinite experience that still leaves its throne untouched. It wants God as an addition. Recognition discovers God as the reality within which the throne, seeker, hunger, and search appear. The person remains real inside a larger order. Your name remains useful. Your work remains real. Your responsibilities become sharper. Your body deserves greater care because it is an expression of the same source, the field through which realization must take form. The world also remains real as expression. Non-duality calls for a clearer relationship with form. The traditional idea of contraction also helps us understand why spiritual pressure can feel physical. A belief held for years has muscular consequences. A fear repeated for years changes breathing, posture, sleep, and attention. A secret defended for years affects the throat before the truth is spoken. When a deeper recognition begins touching that structure, the old organization may resist. Emotion rises. Fatigue appears, restlessness becomes visible. The person interprets resistance as loss of connection, even though the resistance may be showing exactly where contact has reached. That is a subtle turn. Light entering a crowded room reveals dust. The light increased visibility and exposed dust already present. In the same way, prayer, meditation, grief, devotion, or a moment of direct seeing can make hidden residue conscious. The person then says, "Spirituality made me unstable." Sometimes the practice was intense or poorly held, and wise support is needed. Sometimes the practice simply exposed material that distraction kept quiet. Discernment has to separate those cases. LOT refuses to use mystical language as a replacement for care. A racing mind, severe sleep loss, panic, dissociation, or an inability to function deserves grounded support. Spiritual interpretation can sit beside qualified care. Qualified care remains part of the response to suffering. The subtle body map is a traditional map of lived experience. Medical diagnosis belongs to qualified clinical care. That boundary strengthens the teaching. The body can be honored at every level. Physical health, emotional history, relational conditions, and spiritual practice all affect capacity. A person sleeping 3 hours, living under constant threat, and forcing intense exercises may experience constriction for understandable reasons. Calling every difficulty an energetic blockage hides useful information. The sacred can be approached with seriousness and common sense at the same time. The trigger map adds another correction. Contraption itself belongs to consciousness. The limitation appears within the divine field. Even the forgetting has no second universe to occupy. This is where dark and light return to one source. Confusion is painful. Confusion also becomes an experience through which recognition can occur. The knot can become the place the hand finally learns to feel. That protects us from spiritual warfare against the body. The body learned protective patterns under pressure within the same divine field. Some patterns protected survival. Some came through family. Some grew through repetition. Some formed around pleasure. Some arrived through loss. They become limiting when yesterday's protection continues governing today's reality. The work holds gratitude for what helped and clarity about what now narrows the aperture. The yogic subtle body traditions describe another layer through nadis, chakras, prana, and the inner heart. These are source-native ways of mapping how life force, attention, and consciousness become organized in embodied experience. A nadi is a subtle channel in that map. A chakra is a center where forces, functions, symbols, and states of consciousness are gathered. The language varies across texts and lineages. The map still carries one useful insight for this title. Capacity depends on the condition of the channel. A blocked channel is an image with practical depth. Water may be abundant at the source while the passage remains narrow. The response requires work at the passage. In human life, the narrowing can appear as chronic distraction, defended grief, compulsive pleasure, rigid belief, frightened speech, or energy that rises quickly and cannot be integrated. The word blockage then points to a pattern of organization rather than a little physical object lodged somewhere inside the spine. The Upanishadic traditions sometimes speak of channels radiating from the heart, with a central upward path carrying profound spiritual significance. Later yogic systems developed the subtle anatomy in different ways. We should respect those differences. A single universal diagram pasted over every lineage would flatten the sources. The shared pressure concerns direction. Life force can disperse through countless outward movements, or it can become gathered toward recognition. Outward movement carries no automatic sin. The senses belong to life. Work, art, touch, speech, food, love, and the natural world can all express the source. Dispersion begins when attention loses choice. The eye reaches before awareness. The hand checks the phone before intention. The mouth answers before the chest has softened. Desire chooses its object before the person has examined the cost. The current then becomes busy without becoming whole. This is where chakra language can become useful when handled carefully. The lower centers are sometimes treated as inferior in shallow spiritual speech. Tantra gives a richer view. Survival, sexuality, power, love, expression, insight, and transcendence all belong to the field. The issue concerns organization and integration. Fear needs steadiness. Sexual force needs clarity. Power needs conscience. Love needs boundaries. Speech needs truth. Insight needs humility. Transcendence needs embodiment. Every center has a sacred function and a distorted expression. The heart holds special weight because the spiritual heart points beyond emotion alone. In several Indian traditions, heart language names an interior center of being, awareness, or divine recognition. Warm feeling can accompany it, and feeling is only one layer. A person can feel emotionally open for an evening and still act from fear the next morning. Heart contact deepens when knowledge, energy, feeling, and conduct begin aligning. That is why saying activate the heart can remain vague. What would activation look like in life? The person becomes less divided. Speech carries less manipulation. Devotion carries less bargaining. Love becomes capable of truth. Compassion gains a spine. The body can remain present during discomfort. The mind can hold another person's reality without instantly defending its own image. These are forms of conduction. The current reaches behavior. The word ether also needs care. Older systems speak about akasha, space, subtle field, or the element that gives room for sound and form. People sometimes use ether to name the invisible dimension of connection. LOT can honor that symbol while keeping the lesson clear. The deepest connection becomes known as the spacious field within which sensation, thought, breath, sound, and world are already arising. When the body is contracted, that field seems far away. When attention gathers and the contraction softens, space becomes obvious. The room sounds wider. Breath moves with less resistance. A thought can pass without becoming law. Another person can speak without your whole identity rushing to defend itself. These ordinary signs carry spiritual weight because they show a larger field becoming usable. The mistake would be hunting for spectacular evidence while ignoring these changes. A flash of inner light can happen. Heat, vibration, spontaneous emotion, dream intensity, and altered perception can happen. Traditions have rich languages for them. Their spiritual value depends on what follows. Does the person become clearer, more stable, more truthful, more capable of love, less governed by compulsion? The fruit reads the channel better than the spectacle. This brings us back to your temporary limit. Capacity can widen through honest, sustained transformation. The process may include prayer, meditation, ethical discipline, service, therapy, study, rest, sacred sound, ritual, community, and body-based work, depending on the person and lineage. Every tool stays subordinate to divine reality and earns its place by helping recognition become conduct. Now, take the teaching into an ordinary day. A person wakes and reaches for the phone before feeling his own body. Within 3 minutes, attention belongs to messages, headlines, numbers, and comparison. He carries that fragmentation into prayer, and then wonders why the prayer feels thin. The answer sits in the sequence. The first offering of the day trained outward dispersal. Another person carries grief without naming it. She performs well, helps others, speaks intelligently about spirituality, and becomes exhausted whenever stillness arrives. Silence removes the work that kept grief organized. Her chest tightens. She leaves the room, starts a task, and calls herself undisciplined. The deeper reading sees protected sorrow. Usable contact narrows where direct presence would make feeling unavoidable. A third person has a strong meditation experience and tells 5 friends before the body has integrated it. Praise gives the event a social identity. Now he has to preserve the image of being advanced. The next quiet session feels empty, and shame arrives. The original opening becomes trapped inside performance. He starts chasing the evidence that proves the story he told. These scenes look different. The same structure moves through them. Attention leaves the present body, protects an identity, and disperses force. The divine field remains. Usable contact narrows. One can also lose capacity through the language of unworthiness. A person believes closeness to God must be earned through perfection. Each flaw becomes evidence of distance. Shame tightens the body. Then the tightened body makes prayer feel distant, and the distance seems to prove the shame. This is a closed loop. The belief generates the bodily state that appears to confirm the belief. Fear-based religion can reinforce that loop when authority teaches permanent separation. The sincere heart reaches upward while the doctrine keeps measuring the distance. Devotion then carries love and fear in the same vessel. Lot respects devotion. We cut the agreement that says direct contact belongs to an institution, intermediary, or approved identity. A teacher, text, temple, church, mosque, ritual, or lineage can point toward the sacred. The pointer becomes dangerous when it replaces the presence it was meant to serve. The opposite error appears when someone declares absolute identity with God while the life remains chaotic. The statement may reflect a deep, non-dual truth. The condition of the speaker still has to carry it. Claiming infinity can leave embodied contractions untouched. A person can say, "I am God," and use the sentence to avoid apology, responsibility, or care. Grand language then expands the ego while capacity stays narrow. This is why recognition and purification have to speak to each other. Recognition gives the deepest identity. Purification changes the patterns through which that identity becomes lived. One without the other can bend. Purification without recognition becomes endless self-improvement. Recognition without purification becomes spiritual inflation. Together they create a path that is both immediate and patient. Immediate means the source is present now. Patient means the embodied system carries history. The two truths can occupy one sentence. You, as the living presence inside this body, arise from the same consciousness you seek, and this body-mind still requires training to express that recognition with stability. That sentence removes despair and laziness at the same time. The despair says, "God abandoned me." The correction says, "Presence remains." The laziness says nothing needs to change because all is one. The correction says every action reveals how deeply the one reality has been recognized. A non-dual path can be merciless in that way. It removes the comfort of separation and the comfort of performance. The quality of a connection therefore appears through recovery time. Anger may arise. How long does it own speech? Fear may arise. How long does it direct imagination? Desire may arise. How quickly does it become compulsion? Shame may arise. Does it produce honesty or hiding? The widening aperture gives awareness a larger interval before reaction becomes action. Freedom begins inside that interval. Over time, the interval changes identity. The person stops saying, "I am angry," as though anger is the whole being. Anger becomes force moving through the body, carrying information, heat, memory, and a choice. Fear becomes a signal rather than a king. Desire becomes creative energy requiring direction. Grief becomes love meeting change. Each force returns to the wider field. That return is God contact in ordinary clothes. It may feel less dramatic than the opening a person remembers from years ago. It is often more complete. A calm reply during conflict can carry more realized connection than an hour of bliss followed by cruelty. Keeping a promise when no one watches can conduct more sacred force than talking about chakras. Resting when pride wants display can be an act of alignment. The infinite enters form through specific choices. There is a hidden bargain beneath spiritual distance. The conditioned self receives benefits from remaining limited. It gets to postpone responsibility. It gets to preserve familiar pain. It gets to keep blaming the world, the past, the partner, the institution, or the silent heavens. It gets to dream about awakening without allowing awakening to touch the schedule, appetite, speech, or relationships. That bargain can sound humble. I am small. God is great. I am unworthy. God is pure. I am waiting. God will decide. The language appears devotional while helplessness sits underneath it. Genuine humility does something different. It places the personal will inside a greater order and makes the person available for clean action. Helplessness keeps power frozen and calls the freezing surrender. The bargain can also sound advanced. Everything is already perfect. There is nowhere to go. The self is an illusion. Those statements can point toward realized truth. They can also become curtains drawn across unfinished karma. If everything is perfect, why apologize? If the self is an illusion, who keeps repeating the wound? If there is nowhere to go, why does the same insult still control 3 days of thought? The body will tell on the philosophy. Here the title becomes sharper. Temporary limitation gathers around whatever part of the present structure cannot survive direct contact. A grudge cannot survive full recognition of shared being. Manipulation cannot survive transparent love. Compulsion cannot survive stable awareness forever. False humility cannot survive direct inner authority. Spiritual pride cannot survive the realization that every being arises from the same source. So the limit has intelligence. It shows where the next transformation lives. The chest tightens around a person or subject. That constriction marks an entrance. The throat closes around a truth. Speech shows another threshold. Attention becomes frantic whenever silence deepens. Restlessness points toward the next room. The body seeks pleasure whenever grief approaches. Escape identifies the protected edge. The reaction marks the current boundary of capacity. The edge deserves patience. Force can damage what wisdom would slowly open. A person may expose trauma too quickly, chase extreme states, or interpret every sensation as spiritual progress. The desire to remove all limits overnight is another form of control. A stable path respects rhythm. It allows the system to build the capacity it is being asked to hold. Traditions understood preparation for this reason. Ethical order, steady attention, devotion, service, study, bodily care, and guidance were integral to realization because they helped the person carry what realization exposes. A wide current entering weak wiring produces instability. The answer is strengthened capacity, clear direction, and humility before intensity. Here, the central trap appears. Spiritual experience can become the newest limit. The opening that once freed you can become a possession. The vision becomes evidence of specialness. The energy surge becomes a title. The dream becomes a private crown. The teacher's praise becomes identity. Now the person protects the experience from life instead of allowing life to test it. This inversion is common enough to deserve a hard look. The ego can survive sacred language. It can survive silence. It can even survive a temporary dissolution and return with a better story. The fruit still decides. How does the person treat someone who offers no admiration? What happens when plans fail? Can correction enter? Can power remain quiet? Can love tell the truth? The experience itself may remain beautiful. The attachment narrows capacity. A hand closed around a jewel cannot receive water. The person keeps proving what happened and stops becoming available for what is happening. Recognition turns into memory. Memory turns into image. Image turns into defense. The aperture narrows from the inside again. This is the part spiritual culture often handles poorly. One side dismisses every unusual experience. Another side worships every unusual experience. A clearer approach studies the event, its context, its effects, its duration, and its fruit. The event can be honored without becoming the final authority. Ultimate reality outranks every vision. Comment with the area where you feel the strongest inner restriction: attention, emotion, speech, desire, or action. Naming the area gives the next layer a location. It turns vague distance into something the life can actually reveal. The deepest barrier may then look less mystical than expected. It may be the refusal to rest. It may be a relationship built on performance. It may be a secret habit that scatters force. It may be the fear of disappointing a parent whose voice still lives inside the body. It may be unprocessed grief. It may be pride around intelligence. It may be a daily environment that keeps the system under threat. Spiritual contact becomes embodied through conditions as well as concepts. That includes the way time is used. A day crowded from waking to sleep leaves little space for inner signals to become audible. Constant input makes quiet feel empty. Constant urgency trains the body to associate value with speed. Then, a subtle presence seems absent because its quiet signal disappears beneath the noise. The divine volume remained while the listener's sensitivity dimmed. Sensitivity returns when life contains enough honesty to feel itself. That can happen through many valid forms of work. The exact form depends on the person. The principle stays stable. Capacity grows while attention, body, emotion, and action stop pulling in opposite directions. Coherence is spiritual conductivity. Coherence means every force remains in relationship with awareness, even during anger, grief, or fear. A coherent being can feel rage and direct it without cruelty. A coherent being can feel grief and remain capable of love. A coherent being can set a hard boundary without hatred. The force and the awareness remain in relationship. Fragmentation begins when a force takes command and declares itself to be the whole self. This is why heart contact has strength. A sentimental heart opens only while the atmosphere is kind. The spiritual heart can remain available, while truth cuts through illusion. Compassion and discernment work together. Love sees the shared source in the actual behavior. It refuses dehumanization and refuses denial. That quality widens the channel because less energy is spent maintaining false splits. The relationship test is one of the cleanest ways to measure embodied connection. Alone in a quiet room, the person controls the conditions. Another human being introduces unpredictability. They interrupt, misunderstand, need, withdraw, criticize, desire, and carry wounds of their own. The body then shows what the meditation has actually trained. Suppose your partner says one sentence that touches an old insecurity. The chest tightens, heat rises into the face. The mind produces a case in half a second. Connection becomes limited at the exact point where the other person becomes an enemy in perception. The divine field remained in the room, while identification became narrow. One honest second can reopen capacity. Heat becomes sensation rather than verdict. The chest remains tight, yet awareness regains width. The next sentence can be delayed, softened, or made truthful. Connection returns first as room around reaction, then as conduct inside relationship. The sacred appears quietly as restored choice, while the old pattern still asks for command. If awareness stays available, another possibility appears. The body still reacts. The reaction becomes visible before it becomes speech. The old story can be felt as memory. The other person remains a full being rather than a character inside your wound. A clean answer becomes possible. This is spiritual capacity under pressure. The same test appears in work. A colleague receives praise. Comparison enters. The mind measures worth. A spiritual identity may condemn the jealousy and push it down. A mature awareness sees the jealousy as contracted force. It asks what hunger is moving there. Recognition opens the field. Responsibility gives the force direction. Perhaps the hunger points toward neglected ambition. Perhaps it reveals dependence on approval. Either way, the energy becomes usable when it can be seen without worship or shame. Money creates another test. A person can speak abundance while every expense triggers panic. The panic may have real history. Poverty, instability, family stress, or sudden loss can train the body deeply. Spiritual language honors that history, while recognition adds space around it. Practical action, skill, support, and honest planning then become part of the path. God contact expresses through clear numbers as well as prayer. Sexual desire also reveals capacity. Desire carries life force, imagination, attachment, tenderness, hunger, and sometimes escape. When the system lacks clarity, desire can narrow awareness to one object and one promised relief. When awareness stays present, the same force can become intimacy, creativity, devotion, disciplined action, or honest restraint. The spiritual test concerns command and consequence. Free from shame. These examples share a pattern. The limitation becomes visible when one force captures the whole field. Expansion includes the force and restores its context. Anger becomes one movement inside awareness. Fear becomes one signal inside awareness. Desire becomes one current inside awareness. Thought becomes one instrument inside awareness. The person remembers the sky around the weather. Remembering has to become quicker. At first, it may happen hours after the reaction, then 20 minutes, then during the apology, then in the middle of the rising heat. Eventually, awareness is present at the first tightening. This is how temporary limitation changes. Capacity grows through earlier recognition and cleaner recovery. The spiritual ego may demand perfection and miss this progress. It wants permanent transcendence. Life offers increasing freedom inside real conditions. A shorter recovery can be sacred evidence. A cleaner boundary can be sacred evidence. One less lie can be sacred evidence. A night of honest rest can be sacred evidence. The aperture widens through living details. Relationships also expose whether the idea of oneness has become consent to mistreatment. Shared divine ground sharpens discernment. The same source expresses through boundaries, distance, law, protection, and consequence. A person can recognize the sacred in another being and still refuse their behavior. Non-duality places safety, distance, law, protection, and consequence inside sacred conduct. That point belongs here because spiritual language can become a trap. Forgiveness can be rushed. Compassion can be demanded from the injured person. God can be used to erase anger before anger has delivered its information. Real contact makes truth more available and strengthens the person's agency. The widening channel therefore carries both softness and spine. The heart opens, the throat becomes clearer, the body senses danger sooner. Attention stops abandoning itself to keep peace. Love becomes less performative. The inner blockage begins dissolving because the whole person stops cooperating with division. Power now gives the connection its hardest test. A spiritual connection that works only under chosen conditions remains state-dependent. The deeper question is whether recognition can survive power, pleasure, boredom, and uncertainty. These forces expose the remaining limits faster than beautiful language can. Power includes obvious authority and small daily advantages. How do you speak to someone who cannot benefit you? What happens when you know more than the person in front of you? Can you correct without feeding superiority? Can you lead without making dependence feel like devotion? Divine connection becomes embodied when power loses its need to reduce another being. Pleasure tests attachment. Can a beautiful experience be received without turning it into a demand? Can praise pass through without becoming food for identity? Can sexual force move without collapsing attention? Can comfort be enjoyed without losing discipline? Pleasure expands life when awareness remains wider than the object. Boredom tests sensitivity. The conditioned system may require constant stimulation to feel alive. Quiet then appears empty. Repetition appears meaningless. The person reaches for novelty and calls the reaching intuition. Yet a stable connection often deepens inside ordinary repetition. Washing a cup, answering an email, keeping a promise, caring for a bobby, finishing work. The sacred becomes trustworthy when it can inhabit a Tuesday afternoon. Uncertainty tests control. Prayer can become bargaining when the outcome stays unclear. The mind offers devotion in exchange for guarantee. Mature contact allows action without possession of the result. It becomes precise about what belongs to effort and what belongs to reality beyond personal command. These 4 tests show whether the aperture has widened: power, pleasure, boredom, uncertainty. They also keep connection from collapsing into sensation. A person may feel very little during prayer and still live in deep alignment. Another may feel waves of energy and remain governed by compulsion. Sensation is data. Conduct gives the data context. The yogic word prana can help again. Prana becomes visible through direction. Where does vitality go after conflict? Where does it go after praise? Where does it go during an evening alone? Where does it go when fear enters? If energy repeatedly pours into rehearsal, comparison, fantasy, and defense, the person will experience reduced availability for contemplation and love. The limit is built from allocation. Allocation can change, attention can become less scattered, emotion can be allowed to complete its honest movement, speech can become cleaner, the body can receive care, relationships can become more truthful. Work can align with values, practice can grow steady. None of these purchases God. They remove contradictions that make presence difficult to carry. The language of activation can create unnecessary pressure here. A person imagines a switch that should turn everything on. Embodied realization often looks more organic. Capacity expands, stabilizes, meets a hidden knot, reorganizes, and expands again. A powerful opening may be followed by a quiet season of integration. The absence of drama can be evidence of depth. Safety belongs to this power test. Intense spiritual practice can affect sleep, emotion, perception, and functioning. A sudden increase in fear, confusion, sleeplessness, agitation, or detachment from ordinary life deserves attention. A trustworthy teacher will respect limits. Qualified mental health or medical support can be part of wise integration. Reality has no conflict with care. The same caution applies to energy maps. One teacher may describe a sensation as prana. A clinician may describe stress, trauma, or another condition. Both perspectives can hold useful information when used inside their proper boundaries. Certainty without examination creates fresh contraction. Humility keeps the channel open. The goal is living contact. Free from obsession over signs, the person becomes capable of more truth, more presence, more disciplined love, and less automatic harm. The body becomes a clearer instrument. The mind becomes a servant with real skill. Emotion becomes information and force. You, the living awareness expressed through this body, gain room to act. Silence gives us another clean test. Silence itself carries no automatic realization. A quiet room can contain peace, suppression, fatigue, avoidance, presence, or fear. The quality depends on what awareness is doing there. One person sits quietly while fighting every thought. Another drifts into fantasy. Another becomes numb. Another remains intimate with sound, sensation, memory, and the spacious field holding them. The outer scene looks identical. Inner conductivity differs. This explains why forcing silence can deepen division. The mind becomes an enemy that must be crushed. The body becomes an obstacle that must be escaped. Desire becomes evidence of impurity. The seeker creates war in the name of union. Energy then gets spent policing experience, and God contact feels conditional upon achieving the approved inner weather. A non-dual approach changes the question. Every sound, thought, sensation, and emotion arises within awareness. The task concerns recognition and relationship. Can a thought be known as a thought without becoming a command? Can sadness be felt as living energy without becoming total identity? Can a sound enter and leave without the mind building a story around it? The field gains clarity as each movement is allowed its real size. This is where equanimity becomes sacred. Equanimity means balance, spacious enough to feel experience and choose clearly. It carries warmth, it carries force. It gives anger room without handing anger the mouth. It gives fear room without handing fear the future. It gives pleasure room without handing pleasure the steering wheel. The wider field remains in contact with each wave. An untrained identity interprets equanimity as dullness because intensity has become proof of aliveness. Drama gives the body a chemical and emotional rhythm it recognizes. Calm can feel suspicious. Healthy love can feel flat. Honest work can feel slow. A steady prayer can feel weaker than a crisis prayer. The system misses familiar turbulence and calls that turbulence depth. This is another inner restriction, addiction to intensity. It appears in relationships that swing between closeness and withdrawal. It appears in spiritual practice that alternates between extreme effort and abandonment. It appears in the search for visions, powerful teachers, frightening entities, dramatic cleanses, and instant awakening. The person keeps using intensity to break through a capacity. That intensity may be exhausting. Steadiness works differently. It strengthens the ability to remain. Remaining with one promise. Remaining with a hard feeling long enough to hear it. Remaining with a practice after novelty fades. Remaining truthful when image is at risk. Remaining loving when the emotional reward is absent. Divine contact becomes less temporary when the system learns to remain without force. The old language of devotion can help here. Devotion gathers scattered parts around a worthy center. The mind, emotion, body, and action begin facing one direction. Healthy devotion expands inner authority by giving authority to the deepest reality rather than the loudest impulse. The person bows and becomes more whole. Fear can imitate devotion. Fear obeys to avoid punishment. Devotion participates because love recognizes its source. Fear keeps checking whether God is pleased. Devotion allows the sacred to reorganize the life. Fear wants exemption from pain. Devotion asks for the courage to meet reality cleanly. The body often knows the difference through the quality of contraction. Prayer spoken from fear may feel like pressure in the throat, repetition without presence, or bargaining in the stomach. Prayer spoken from devotion can still carry grief and urgency. The difference is relationship. The person is available to truth beyond the desired outcome. He may ask intensely and remain willing to listen. She may weep and remain connected to dignity. The prayer gathers the being instead of scattering it. The phrase heart chakra with the ethers can be translated through this lens. The heart center becomes less obstructed as love, truth, grief, boundary, and devotion learn to occupy one field. The ether symbolizes space, sound, and subtle connection. The heart reaches that wider space as love and hidden truth learn to occupy one field. Openness gains structure. Grief plays a central role because grief exposes love without possession. Something precious changes or leaves. The body feels the loss. A contracted system may freeze, distract, spiritualize, or hurry toward meaning. A wider system lets grief move while the deeper field remains. The person discovers that pain can occur inside connection. God contact no longer depends on feeling good. That discovery changes the whole path. Earlier, pleasure meant closeness and pain meant distance. Success meant blessing and disruption meant abandonment. Now the person can feel sacred presence inside uncertainty, grief, effort, and unanswered prayer. The aperture widens because experience receives room beyond the old emotional entrance exam. Tantra carries this dark light intelligence. Fear, grief, desire, beauty, anger, and shock can become material for awakening when held with steadiness, humility, discernment, and care. The force is included under awareness. Inclusion studies the force under awareness, removes exile, and releases energy for transformation. Consider anger. Suppressed anger can harden the chest and jaw. Unrestrained anger can injure. Included anger becomes information about violation, value, fear, or grief. Awareness reads it. Conscience gives it form. The resulting action may be a boundary, a conversation, a departure, a protection, or an apology for where the anger struck blindly. Connection becomes visible through how force is shaped. Consider envy. Condemning envy sends it underground. Obeying envy poisons relationship. Including envy reveals a comparison, a neglected desire, or a wound around worth. The energy can then become honest aspiration or release. God contact becomes practical because no emotion needs to hide behind a spiritual mask. Consider shame. Shame narrows the field around a verdict about identity. Remorse says an action requires repair. Shame says the whole being deserves exile. The difference changes conductivity. Remorse can lead to apology, changed behavior, and restored relationship. Shame often creates hiding, performance, and repetition. A divine identity deepens accountability and makes repair possible without total self-condemnation. These distinctions show why spiritual wisdom needs psychological honesty. A mantra cannot perform the apology the person refuses to make. A vision cannot set the boundary the person keeps avoiding. A chakra explanation cannot name the grief buried beneath overwork. Sacred tools have power. Their power deepens when the life stops asking them to perform the work of evasion. Service gives us another scale of proof. Inner connection can become private and self-absorbed. A person can become absorbed in sensations, signs, and energetic self-protection, then discover the limit of that absorption when another being needs inconvenient help. Service asks whether the gathered force can move beyond self-concern. Service can begin with ordinary acts, attention given without checking the phone. It can be work completed with care. It can be money handled honestly. It can be protection offered to a vulnerable being. It can be a skill developed because that skill will benefit others. The divine current enters the world through useful form. This also corrects spiritual isolation. Solitude can gather attention. Permanent withdrawal can protect untested patterns. Community introduces friction and responsibility. The person learns whether inner peace can share a kitchen, answer a message, receive feedback, and contribute without applause. Capacity widens when contact survives participation. The body of another being becomes a sacred limit on fantasy. You may believe yourself compassionate. Their actual experience gives the belief a test. You may believe yourself truthful. Their trust records your consistency. You may believe yourself detached. Their pain shows whether detachment became absence. Relationship turns metaphysics into consequence. The world itself becomes part of the test. If the body and cosmos are expressions of one intelligence, contempt for the material world creates contradiction. Care for water, animals, land, objects, and shared spaces can express recognition. The action need not become a performance. It simply follows from seeing form as worthy of relationship. This is where spiritual wisdom becomes less glamorous and more powerful. The connection appears in how the person leaves a room, uses resources, keeps agreements, responds to weakness, and handles inconvenience. These details carry less spectacle than a vision. They build a vessel that can hold vision without corruption. Discipline then receives a deeper meaning. Discipline is gathered love given continuity. Fear-based discipline attacks the body. Image-based discipline performs superiority. Conscious discipline coordinates body, mind, emotion, and life force around a chosen direction. It gives the aperture a stable shape. There will be days when the connection feels strong and days when it feels thin. Discipline preserves relationship across those changes. A person keeps the clean promise without requiring inspiration. He tells the truth without waiting for courage to feel pleasant. She rests before exhaustion becomes collapse. The ordinary action keeps the path open through shifting weather. This is how grace and effort meet. Grace names what arrives beyond personal control. The opening, insight, support, encounter, or inexplicable movement of the heart. Effort prepares relationship with what arrived. Grace opens the shutter. Effort keeps the room from being filled again with the same debris. Each needs the other in embodied life. Effort without grace becomes strain. Grace without effort becomes memory. The balanced path receives and participates. It recognizes that the power to make effort also appears within the wider field. Personal agency is real as an expression of divine agency, neither absolute nor meaningless. The word surrender can now become cleaner. Surrender means releasing the false claim of total control while remaining fully available for action. It is involvement without sticky ownership. The person acts, cares, plans, repairs, and serves. Results move through a larger field. This quality reduces the contraction created by constant self-reference. Self-reference consumes enormous force. How do I look? What does this mean about me? Am I ahead? Am I behind? Did I have the right experience? Does God approve? Each question can become a mirror turned toward the contracted identity. Service, devotion, and honest work turn attention back toward reality. This movement also changes spiritual discernment. A teaching gains value through what it creates in perception and conduct. Does it increase dependency on the teacher or deepen direct contact? Does it produce fear or sober responsibility? Does it inflate specialness or widen kinship? Does it honor the body or demand reckless proof? The fruits reveal the current. An ethical teacher can challenge. A demanding practice can expose resistance. Discomfort alone proves neither harm nor wisdom. The key concerns clarity, consent, proportion, care, and the direction of the resulting life. A widening channel creates greater agency. A controlling structure reduces it. This is important for anyone who feels blocked within. Vulnerability can make certainty seductive. Someone promises instant opening, permanent activation, or exclusive access to God. The promise reaches the pain of distance. Discernment protects the sacred hunger from exploitation. Any real lineage should be able to respect questions, limits, and the dignity of the practitioner. The connection belongs to the source before it belongs to any institution. Teachers can transmit, correct, support, and embody wisdom. They remain human expressions within the field. The goal is mature relationship with truth, free from blind dependency and free from arrogant isolation. The examples now reveal 4 depths of the same temporary limitation. The first is momentary. Attention scatters during one conversation or prayer. The second is habitual. A reaction repeats until it feels like personality. The third is structural. A life is organized around conditions that keep the system contracted. The fourth is existential. Consciousness identifies with a finite viewpoint and forgets its ground. Each scale needs the response appropriate to it. A momentary contraction may clear through simple awareness and time. A habit may require sustained retraining. A structural condition may require practical change, support, safety, and new relationship. Existential forgetting opens through recognition of consciousness itself. Confusing the scales can waste years. A person may use metaphysics against a structural problem. She says all is one while remaining in an unsafe environment. Another person may use practical optimization against existential hunger. He improves sleep, schedule, food, and work, then wonders why a deeper emptiness remains. Another chases existential insight while every daily habit scatters the force needed to stabilize it. The 4 scales belong in one map. This map also reduces self-blame. A contraction has causes and conditions. Responsibility means participating in change. Blame reduces the whole being to the contraction. You, as awareness moving through this form, can study the condition without turning it into a final identity. That is inner authority with compassion. As the scales come into view, prayer changes. The person can ask for help without outsourcing agency. He can ask for clarity and then examine his habits. She can ask for courage and then tell the truth. Devotion joins action. The request becomes participation. The same joining happens in meditation. Stillness becomes a place where patterns are seen, source is recognized, and capacity is strengthened. The session then continues through the day as recovery, speech, attention, boundary, service, and restraint. The sacred room gains doors into every other room. At this point, the internal blockage has lost some mystery. It remains profound, and it becomes readable. Noise, constriction, contradiction, addiction to intensity, protected identity, unintegrated experience, and confused scale can each narrow connection. None of them proves divine absence. Each gives transformation a location. Subscribe if you want LOT to keep building teachings at this level of depth. The final layer concerns what temporary really means. There is also dignity in working with a limit before it dissolves. A person can remain devoted while the chest still tightens, truthful while fear still speaks, and responsible while clarity continues growing. Freedom begins before every symptom of contraction disappears. It begins when the contraction loses the right to define the whole being. That change may look quiet from the outside. Inside, authority has shifted. Awareness sees the pattern, the body receives care, and action follows a deeper allegiance. The divine current becomes available in the very place that once seemed to prove separation. This is how limitation becomes initiation, without turning pain into a romantic story. The wound receives truth, the habit receives consequence, the person receives room to become different. God contact grows through that room, one honest movement at a time. Temporary has no guaranteed schedule. A contraction carried for decades may loosen slowly. Another may break open in one honest moment. Comparison creates extra pressure. The path unfolds through the actual body, history, support, conditions, and willingness present in this life. The useful question concerns direction. Is capacity widening? Is recovery becoming cleaner? Is recognition entering more rooms? The word limited also deserves compassion. Limitation can feel humiliating in a culture that worships instant activation. Yet every embodied viewpoint carries limits. You cannot see through every eye at once. You cannot act through every life at once. Spiritual freedom works through a particular form. The aim is to recognize finite embodiment as an expression of source rather than proof of separation. That distinction changes the emotional tone. The body becomes a sacred, finite instrument of an infinite field. Its need for sleep carries no spiritual failure. Its history carries no final verdict. Its sensations deserve attention. Its limits give shape to service. Form lets the formless touch the world in a specific way. The temporary inner blockage then becomes a teacher. It shows where care, truth, discipline, grief, courage, or surrender must enter. It gives the infinite a specific doorway into this life. A person who understands this stops asking only, "Why can I not feel God?" A better question appears, what in this present structure narrows recognition, conduction, or embodiment? Recognition returns the source, conduction trains the capacity, embodiment proves the relationship. These are the three movements to remember. Recognition without conduction flashes and disappears. Conduction without embodiment becomes private energy. Embodiment without recognition can become rigid virtue. Together, they create living contact. The first restriction was noise. It weakens as attention gains direction. The second was constriction. It softens as the body can feel without immediate defense. The third was contradiction. It loses force as choices begin matching realization. Each movement opens the aperture from within. The change may look quiet, the person simply becomes more available. The eyes stop searching for threat in every silence. The throat speaks earlier and cleaner. The chest can hold grief without closing love. Desire gains direction. Work becomes less divided. Prayer becomes less like a call across distance and more like consciousness remembering its own depth. This is where the title completes itself. God contact can become temporarily limited, and that limit lives within the current organization of attention, body, and action. The same life that formed the contraction can participate in its transformation. The source remains present through the whole process. Imagine a room built beneath an open sky. For years, the person inside studies pictures of daylight and prays for the sun to come closer. Then the hand finds a shutter on the inner wall. It moves with resistance. Dust falls. A narrow line of blue appears.